have been too, so.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll get us started then, since I'm running the PowerPoint. Welcome to this month's Transition Roundup. And today we're going to be talking with Beth Schultz about planning for graduation. Oh, now I can't get my thing to work. Trying to get the PowerPoint to work. Here we go. We have 2 more transition roundups coming up. March 22nd and then April 26th. Any of my coworkers here want to discuss what we're looking at talking about? Or
It's a surprise.
I was going to say it's still a surprise to me, so
Stay tuned.
stay tuned. We'll figure it out.
Meaning we haven't figured it out yet.
We haven't figured it out, but we will. Upcoming Catch the Wave events. Unfortunately, Mitchell was supposed to be tomorrow and it's not going to be anymore, but she already has it rescheduled. So Mission is going to be at Todd County High School on March 8th. Mitchell, I didn't update the location. It will be at, what's the Hillside? What is that?
They'll be at the Highland Conference Center.
Highland Conference Center. Rapid City at the School of Mines on March 22nd. Vermillion, University of South Dakota on March 23rd. Lake Area Technical College on March 28th.
Session in March.
I'm sorry? Oh, and we've got Northern State University on April 4th. And my cat Reggie decided to come in and talk to us, so forgive me. 23rd Annual Youth Leadership Forum. We are in the process of planning this and getting our students interviewed, and we'll meet soon to select those students. That's going to be June 4th through 8th here at NSU in Aberdeen. And our annual Transition Summer Institute is July 11th and 12th at Arrowwood Resort in Oklahoma. Bev, you're our expert in what's coming up for the Summer Transition Institute. You want to speak on that for a second?
Sure. Well, we have some great speakers lined up. We have a couple speakers at the national level. We have someone coming from the National Technical Assistance Center for Transition that will help us talk about transition requirements, Indicator 13. We have a gentleman coming who is an expert in supported employment issues, and we have some wonderful people within the state too that are going to be talking about various topics. So, and we will be inviting agency representatives like we always do, because that seems to be a very popular part of the Institute, is for you as a teacher to have a chance to meet with agencies and agency reps one-on-one basically throughout the day. So those are just a few of the highlights.
This is Dan, and thanks, Bev. One thing that I wanted to do before we moved on today too was I want to thank all the VR counselors and all the teachers that have helped us to coordinate all of our YLF interviews. It's a kind of a challenging time to get out. We had over 90 applications this year, students, and so we go out and interview each and every one of them. And it's really nice to have the help and support from our teachers to make arrangements to get those done. And then our VR counselors that help us in the interview process. So thank you. Thanks, Kate. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would like to double that. Thank you very much for helping us out. And again, the liaisons, we're available for technical assistance visits. We can come to your school and work with you on Indicator 13 and transition planning. Call us when you have questions, when you're working through your IEPs. We're here to help you. So our information is here on this screen, but it's also on the tslp.org website. So be sure to hit us up. And with that, Unless there's something else, we're ready to hand it over to Beth. Beth, did you want to run your own PowerPoint or do you want me to bring it up on my screen?
Well, I think you're gonna have to bring it up. Can I? Maybe I can. I don't know.
I
Oh,
think you can, but it's up to you.
I think I can. Okay.
See, this is Dave
Let's
Halverson.
do
Just a quick
that.
introduction on Beth. She's with the Department of Education, Special Education Programs, and she's our transition person at the Special Education Programs Office. She's responsible for Indicators 13, which is the transition file requirements, Indicator 14, which is outcomes of students with disabilities 1 year after they leave high school. And she's also helping with dropout and graduation at the present time. There have been some changes at the department, and so Beth is helping with that. She's very passionate about accommodations and modifications, and she's very much involved with the state high stakes testing. So with that, Beth, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. So good afternoon, and I'm glad to see that there's so many people on this afternoon. I wondered if maybe that wouldn't happen because there wasn't school. So we're really glad you could join us. So today we're going to kind of really talk about what the graduation requirement is. I know it says graduation planning, but I think with that planning, we really need to talk about what those requirements are and what that looks for students with disabilities. Then we're also going to talk some about what accommodations versus modifications are and how that can impact those kids. Okay. And then hopefully we'll have enough time left that we can entertain any questions that you may have as well. So
And Beth,
this,
is it
yes.
okay if people put questions in the chat if they feel?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And feel free to interrupt me if I'm in the middle of an area too, so we can get those answered right away. So this is kind of informal, don't hesitate to ask questions. So on the screen, you can now see that there's a link to the graduation requirements. This is the infographic that really tells about all of those graduation requirements. And if you go to that first section that talks about documents and links, that very first link is that handbook that really has a lot of those high school graduation requirements in it. It also has a lot of good Q&A if you're interested in that as well. So to start with, we're going to talk about what is needed for those graduation requirements. You must have 3 units of math, and the 1 unit of math that is required is that Algebra 1, and then 2 other math electives. Those math electives can be anything from pre-algebra to integrated math to whatever else you want to do, but 1 credit, 1 unit has to be that Algebra 1. Okay. With that Algebra 1, there is also a course called Algebra Enhancement. And with that Algebra Enhancement, the students can take this course right along with algebra. So what they're doing is they're getting 2 units of math in the same year. What Algebra Enhancement does is it reinforces, reviews, and expands those concepts that are taught in the algebra course. Makes it a little easier for those kids. This course offers structured support to those students who are enrolled in Algebra 1, and it also includes materials to prepare students for that Algebra 1. So it's taken alongside it. So really this is like 2 class periods. Algebra 1 is 1 class period, and Algebra Enhancement is another class period. Another way that you can do Algebra 1 is you can have Algebra 1 and Algebra 1 year and Algebra 1.5 the next year. That would then fulfill that requirement for 1 credit of algebra. So what you're doing is you're slowing down that algebra coursework. I know there are some districts that have been doing that, not just for students with disabilities, for all kids, because there are even some other kids that have a hard time getting through that algebra coursework. So if you slow it down, go slower, then those students have more time to really digest and ingest that material and that information. social studies, you have to have 3 units of social studies. So you have to have US history and you have to have government. Then you have to have 1.5 of social studies electives. For science, you have to have biology and then 2 other units of science electives. And you can see there are all sorts of science electives that you could choose from for those students. Okay, so what we're really talking about is we're talking about those base diploma requirements. So you must have those 4 units of language arts. So one of those units does need to be writing. You need to have a half a unit of speech debate. You have to have 1 unit of literature and then 1.5 units of language arts electives. And that can be anything that has a course code assigned to it. We talked about the math, how 1 unit has to be that algebra 1, and then 2 units for math electives. Remember that algebra enhancement class can be one of those electives. 3 units of science, 1 unit must be that biology, and then 2 other science electives. Social studies, the US history has to be 1 unit, and US government is just a half of a unit or a half of a credit, and then 1.5 credits of other social studies electives. You need to have 1 unit or any combination of an approved CTE, that's career and technical education coursework, a capstone experience, or a world language. I think when they're talking about world language, they're talking about those foreign languages. Notice that you must have 22 credits, and with those 22 credits, you have to have that half a credit of personal finance or economics. You have to have a half a credit of physical education. You have to have 1 unit of fine arts. You have to have a half a unit of health or integrated health, and you have to have 5.5 other electives.
Beth, we
And-
have a question in the chat. The question is, so does Algebra Part 1 and Algebra Part 2 only count for 1 math credit, or are
Yes.
they each worth a credit? So-
Nope, they would be each a half of a credit. It would be 1 credit because the students have to have both of those to have that Algebra 1 credit.
Thank you.
Good question though, good question. The only one that you could use as the extra credit, the full credit, would be that enhanced algebra. And that would be a full credit for a full year. So when I showed you the link to the documents, and then I talked to you about that graduation requirements document, on page 29 of that document, it actually has this form that you could use with students to check to ensure that they have all of the credits and all of the information they need to graduate. I didn't realize this was in here until I got to look and found that this was all in here. Notice that they have the base requirements listed, and then all you'd have to do is check them off, what year they're going to take them or what grade they're going to take them in, and then how many units or credits they're worth, and then you fill in the blanks for everything else that is needed.
Beth, we do have another question in the chat. It says electives can be modified, just not the core classes.
So we're going to talk about modifications and accommodations, and I'll answer
Okay.
that question then.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
There is also a question about whether you have a DOE code for the algebra enhancement credit.
I think there is also an algebra enhancement code. You would go to those common course codes, and it would be on there. I haven't looked at that in a while, so I can't guarantee it's there, but I'm thinking it probably is. Good question. So South Dakota does have just 1 regular signed diploma. However, IEP teams can modify the course requirements needed to receive maybe like a district diploma or certificate of completion. Okay, when you modify those course requirements, that does not fulfill FAPE. That's that free appropriate public education. And if it hasn't fulfilled FAPE, then students are still allowed that being able to come back and get those credits. This must be done. If you're going to modify those course requirements, you got to do it with caution and by fully informing parents and students of implications that may be resulted from modifying those course requirements. So that definition of a regular high school diploma is the students who exit an educational program through receipt of a regular high school diploma identical to that for which students without disabilities are eligible. So in other words, students met the same standards for graduation as students without disabilities. Does not include an alternative degree not fully aligned with the state's academic standards, such as a certificate or district diploma or GED. IEPs must denote whether the student will meet the same graduation requirements as students without disabilities, or if the IEP team is modifying the course requirements. Okay, you have to really let everybody on that IEP team know what's happening and what's coming and what's being talked about. If you are modifying the course requirements, you must document it on the comments in the course of study section on the IEP, and you must also put that information in the PPWN, that prior written notice to parents after the meeting, so that they can look back and see what was all discussed, why you decided to modify the coursework, what you're replacing with, what course you're replacing for the required course, why you're doing that, what was that conversation, so that nobody is surprised when the student has not fulfilled those requirements for that regular signed diploma. So if the IEP should bring forward the modified graduation, and if the IEP team is going to bring forward that modified graduation coursework each year, you need to really talk about it every year so everybody's on the same page. So you don't get to that last year and then you're going to have surprises. We don't want that. We want everybody to be on the same page all the way through high school. If they are modified, then again, we talked about this, FAPE does not end until they meet all of the regular signed high school diploma requirements, similar to that of their peers, or if they've aged out. Okay, are there questions about that?
One more question from the chat. Did we discuss computer science elective that will work as one of the 3 sciences?
We did not, but I think that is one of those. If you look at the science requirements, it doesn't have it listed on there, but I think that is one of those that you can use for one of the science electives, is that computer science. I could check on that for you. That is a really good question. Hang on, let me write that down.
I was under the impression it had to be a lab science versus, so computer science technically is a lab science. You're working in computer labs, so that would be good to know if that one would count as that 3rd science.
Okay, I will definitely check on that to see if that will work. Okay. Hadn't thought about that before. Also on that high school graduation requirement pages, there is a section called Students with Disabilities or Students with Special Needs. And in there are a couple of different documents that you can look at. And one is that disabilities policy, and that was updated in 2020. There's another one, graduation code guidance and questions and answers on report cards and transcripts. That one, disability policies, that has a lot of good questions and answers if you do have questions about what that regular signed diploma is. So now we're going to move on to the accommodations versus modifications. This is the part that there are always a lot of questions on, and it's really up to the districts to decide if it really is an accommodation or if it's a modification. Those accommodations are supports and services that help the student fully access the curriculum. Such things as how the student is learning or accessing the curriculum, changes in the way the materials are being presented, changes in how the student is responding. gives them an opportunity to participate in curricular activities, keeps intact that content or activity, keeps intact the content standards. It just helps remove some of those barriers. Now, a modification changes what the student is learning. It lowers that expectations. They change the learning goal for an individual and are used when you're looking at that general curriculum. Changes are made to the content and performance expectations. Complexity levels of change, that you're expecting less of that student. Utilizes different grading criteria or credit received compared to their peers. Instead of getting a letter grade, maybe you're doing a pass fail. That would be a change in that grading criteria. Okay, so they have to be graded the same as their non-disabled peers are being graded. So what might accommodations look like in high school? So they're getting the content based on grade level content standards. They're showing mastery of grade level content. When we talk about mastery, what happens if they don't master one or two of the standards? Do all students master every single content standard? And I think my answer to that would be, I don't think so. So are students with disabilities expected to master every single content standard? Probably not master them, but have exposure to them and have the right to access that curriculum, and the opportunity to learn that curriculum is what they need. And then to be graded like their non-disabled peers on if they've mastered them or not. So some accommodations examples would be things like extended time, changing the time format. Maybe students do better in the morning, so you might put some of their more challenging classwork, coursework in the morning rather than in the afternoon. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they are more apt and more able to learn in the afternoon than in the morning. An example of this is when my son was in school. Unless I had a specific question that needed to be answered, I didn't talk to him before he went to school in the morning. He just was not a morning person. After school, man, he was a chatty Cathy. He would talk and talk and talk. So if I wanted him to do his best, it would probably have been more in the afternoon. He was more of an afternoon person than a morning person. Another one would be audio to text. In other words, talking into a microphone and having the computer do the typing for the student. Is this really changing the content standards for the student? Because what you want is that student to be able to get the information from in their minds down to the paper. And if that can come through audio rather than through handwriting, I think that would be an accommodation. Provide a large copy of material. Maybe they're a visual or have a visual disability and need things that are bigger, blown up. A lot of computers nowadays, you can make things bigger, so that also helps as well. Break longer assignments into more manageable segments, chunk things. Instead of giving them an assignment in which they have to manage their time and get everything done by the end of the week, maybe break that down so they have to get shorter pieces of it done every day. So hand this part in today, this part in tomorrow, this part in the next day. Give directions in smaller steps. Provide copy of the class notes. Is it imperative that the students take their own notes, or can a copy of those class notes be given to the student? Can you pair them with a peer and have the peer help them with those class notes? Work in small groups, have peer groups to help them. Provide graphic organizers, help them to understand by using those graphic organizers. Another one on here that I don't see, provide information received orally. This is the one I was really kind of looking for. So are students able to use audiobooks, so where they can actually listen to the content that's being provided to them and then provide an answer orally rather than writing it down? Is that an option? Is that something that would help them? Some accommodations though might also be modifications. So you have to really look at what the content standards are and at what you really are trying to provide for the students. What are those expectations at that grade level? So in other words, reducing the number of items on an assignment. If the student can show what he knows or understands for all of the content that's being taught with less items, then that's an accommodation. But if the student is only answering those easy questions, or let's say it's a math and they're only doing the addition and the multiplication because they're having trouble with subtraction and division, then that would be a modification. So again, look at what the content is, look at what you expect, look at what everyone else in the class is doing and decide, have they met those standards?
We have another question from the chat. If an ELA teacher is grading students on an IEP, quote, softer, because they are on an IEP, that is a modification, correct?
That's something you're going to have to talk about, because what does softer mean? So that's not, I'm not sure if that's something I can answer. If you're talking about they let things go, would they let things go for a general ed student that is having trouble? If they're letting it go for the general ed students as well, then that's their non-disabled peers as well. Want to be careful with letting things go. I had a question come at me today. So what if kids in 7th and 8th grade are getting more accommodations than what's allowed in high school? Well, if some of those accommodations really look like a modification, and then they get to high school, are they going to have the content, information, and knowledge they need for that high school coursework? So you have to really kind of be careful to make sure that we're preparing them for high school when they get there.
The follow-up was they are allowed to write using incorrect grammar, syntax, and illogical flow of writing.
Have they tried letting them use like a speech to text? I mean, those are things that you really need to talk about at an IEP meeting. So if the student is having a hard time with spelling, is spelling really what's being graded? And if it is, then okay, then teach the student how to use the computer where they can type their information and look for that correct spelling. If it's not, then can they use that speech to text where they can talk into a mic and get that information down? Have they looked at other assistive technology devices that might help that student? So instead of grading softer, are there other accommodations that would be more appropriate? I know if you look at a Word document and you can actually enable some of those accessibility features, there is one on there that is that speech to text where you can actually talk into it and it does do the typing for the student. Now, it might not always correctly punctuate, or it might not always correctly put the correct word in, but then that's up to the student to do that editing. So maybe it's more about teaching the students how to edit once they have that speech to text in place. Any other questions?
Well, we did have let's see, just to follow up to the last question, and then just kind of asking, then generally they should be graded on the same level as their non-disabled peers, correct?
I would say that's correct, because I think in some of the previous slides, that's what we had talked about.
Okay, and then Beth, just a quick follow-up to that. Let's see, so if the student, if it's a difference between like an A and a B with that soft grading, that might not be maybe as big of a deal if it's whether they would pass the class and demonstrate mastery, or is that
correct? I think if it's a difference between an A and a B, that's different probably than an A and a pass fail. So again, that's just something the districts are going to have to talk about and decide. So is this a modification or is this an accommodation? Are we expecting so much less of this student, or is this student actually showing that they can and do understand what the standards are that are being taught? So again, it's kind of hard to answer those questions because I'm not sure what standard you're talking about. when I'm talking about standard, I'm talking about the content standards. So again, depends on what content standard that you are teaching at that time to the students and what they have to show that they know and understand.
And Beth, we had a suggestion from another listener or teacher, just kind of a statement, using a writing rubric to grade the work for all students may be helpful to demonstrate understanding or mastery. So that was just kind of a comment.
Yep.
And
Good
then
idea.
we had kind of a question here, but maybe also looking at some ideas on how to help more students. What about scaffolding and prompting through problems with students on assignments or assessments? And so what if we do that scaffolding or prompting? Is that going to be, I guess we're kind of looking at, is that an accommodation or a modification, or hard to tell?
So I think sometimes what you're doing is asking me questions, and it's going to depend on the situation, and it's going to depend on the standard that's being taught, and it's going to depend on what you're expecting from non-disabled peers. Just because a student has disability doesn't necessarily mean they need all those things. Or do you have some other students who are low achieving that might also need that as well? So maybe it's not just students with disabilities that you're providing the support to. So again, is that something that's just being done for students with disabilities? Then you might want to take a little bit closer look at that. Is this something that would help the whole class or help some other members of the class? You know, I think you have to have some of those conversations sometimes. It's kind of hard to say yes or no, because if you look at some of my slides, especially this last one, it says some accommodations could also be modifications, just like some modifications could also be accommodations, and it's going to depend on those situations. So it's really hard to say yes or no. That makes sense?
Yes, and I think we're caught up with the chat now.
Okay. So again, that modification directly alters the material or the curriculum. It removes a difficult question on a test. So it's too difficult, so I'm going to give them a simpler question. Again, we want them to demonstrate what they do know, where an accommodation could be that extended time. It could be maybe underlining notes. It could be maybe masking, where the student might mask something because seeing all that information on a page helps or keeps them from moving forward. Different seating, preferential seating, all of those things are accommodations. Modifications, again, here's some examples. So remembering versus analyzing. So modification, if you just want them to remember information rather than everybody else is analyzing, cutting those assignments, having a 10-point scale for students with disabilities, but having a 7-point scale for everyone else. You want to grade them on that same scale. Now, a rubric would be a wonderful, perfect idea, because then you're grading them all on the same rubric and giving them the scores that show how they can demonstrate that information. Make sure when you are having these accommodations and modifications conversations that you involve parents and school staff. A lot of the questions you've been asking me need to be made. These conversations need to be had with your school staff as well. I was just in a meeting today where we were talking about accommodations and having that conversation with students about what accommodations do they use and do they work, asking them, so do you use accommodations? And maybe don't use the word accommodations. Be specific. Do you use highlighting? Does it help? How does it help? If they're not using it, ask them why it's not working and what might work better for them. If they're using the speech to text, or if the handwriting and taking notes isn't working, ask them what else might work. Ask if they want to do the speech to text where they could talk into the computer. If they're having a hard time reading content information, say for social studies or for history or for American Lit or something like that, would an audiobook help them? So any of those assistive technology things that might actually help students to get that content information, have that conversation with them. If it's something they're not using it, then don't put it on their IEP. Kids are going to be very frank. They're going to know what works and what doesn't work. Ask them.
Beth, I do see another question in the chat from a little earlier that I missed. But let's see, basically, I guess we had a couple of folks ask about if it is not a core class, then the electives can be modified. Is that correct? So if it's not required, I guess for graduate, or it's not a specific
required course.
And then here's the other one. Let me read the other one too. So maybe this one's worded a little bit more clearly. Electives can be modified, just not the core classes, correct? So could personal finance be modified, or physical education? Question.
So I think physical education could be. I'm not so sure about the personal finance. I'd have to check on that one. If you did modify it, I don't know that you'd want to modify it too much, because you want those kids to get that information that they need to succeed for that coursework. I know, so for some of the coursework, they could put in some of their life skill classes if they're science type classes, or if they're those 5.5 and a half other electives, they could use some of those in there.
I was going to say, Beth, personal finance, I think, is a required, don't they have to have a half credit of that? So
yeah, just so long as you are teaching the content that the students need, the standards, because I think there are maybe some standards that you have to meet, or the syllabus that you have to meet for that personal finance. I don't think it probably tells you when and how you have to teach that. I think that's going to be up to the districts, just so long as they meet that requirement of what personal finance is. Yes, I have not really looked into what those courses are and what they look like. Okay. Okay, I think we're about done. I've had a lot of good questions from you. Are there more questions? I know sometimes it's really hard for me to answer your questions because there's not sometimes a yes or a no. It depends, because it's going to depend on what those course requirements are, what the standards are. If they're taking the class with their non-disabled peers, are they meeting the same standards as their non-disabled peers? Students want to be in those classes with their non-disabled peers, want to do the same assignments as their non-disabled peers. They don't want to be treated different. So
Beth, any suggestions or advice? I've been to several schools here in the last few weeks and lots of questions about this, but a common question I heard across the board too is suggestions or advice for high school SPED teachers to be talking with the middle school, junior high, whatever you call it, the teachers of the students prior to getting to high school, because there is concern about
they're not prepared for high school.
Number of accommodations, or what they are calling at the lower level accommodations, but when the student gets to the high school level, in fact, they could very well be modifications, and then that's an issue, obviously.
It really is. So that's something districts have to really be aware of, is that they're using that word accommodations and modifications, and ensuring that those kids that are in junior high are going to be prepared for when they get to high school. If you're really watering down their content in the junior high, are they going to be prepared in the high school? So again, that's that conversation. I know I'm planning to do more of these accommodations, modifications type trainings hopefully this fall. I've got some ideas on what I want to do. And I'm hoping it's going to be something that's going to be shared not with just special ed teachers, but with gen ed teachers as well. Because it's those gen ed teachers that are actually helping with those accommodations and the modifications as well. So stay tuned.
And Beth, we have several questions in the chat. Let's see, maybe kind of going in order here. I guess Katie Grand from Voc Rehab is asking if she can get a copy of the PowerPoint. So I
Sure.
know that should be on the TSLP website when we do that, but
Yep.
sounds good. And then next, let's see, Jennifer's asking, is there a requirement about who teaches the classes also? And she says, we have heard sometimes it has to be a certified teacher in those areas versus a SPED teacher.
Yes, especially for those core classes. So if it's the algebra, it has to be have to be certified in high school math, high school algebra. If it's for the science classes, especially for the biology, it has to be that high school science teacher or someone certified in high school science.
And is it possible for a special ed teacher to be certified to teach algebra?
I guess that's not a question I know the answer to at this time.
I think they
know
can be.
that
Yeah.
I think that there are some alternate certifications that are happening. So
Okay.
I think they would have to take a praxis test maybe, or
And I think there are some teachers who are
both.
highly qualified in some of those areas. So maybe that's another
I think so too.
something to look into for some districts. Let's see,
Yeah.
and I guess we have a few more questions. Maybe I'll turn things over to
I see.
Kate, and maybe she can ask some. Maybe I'll give her some easier ones to ask you.
Well, the next one in line was just a clarification on the assignment modification area. If a student can show mastery on doing 10 problems compared to 30 problems, does then that count as an accommodation instead of a modification?
So long as he's
Short
met all
assignment.
of the standards. So you're going to hear my bias on this one. It's like, so if a special ed student can show it in 10 problems, why are you punishing the general ed students by making them do 20 more problems? Why not just let all the students do just the 10 problems to show mastery?
Good question.
And that's kind of me being that teacher for so many years. And that's what I used to do with the kids. Bring your paper up, show me you can do it. If you can do it, let's move on to the next type of question. If you can't do it, then let's do one more. If you can't do it, let's do one more. Let's reteach and do one more. That's just a strategy I used with my math kids. So that's that question of how many questions does it take to show mastery or show that they know the content. Again, that's going to be up to that teacher.
Got lots of good questions here. I'm trying to go in order. If an IEP student can only do a certain ELA content standard at 6th grade level, but not at his grade level, which is 11th grade, he will have to demonstrate grade level standards to get a basic diploma. Is that right?
That's kind of right.
Yeah. Sarah asks, I have a student who is a junior and requires extensive extra time. He is fully capable to complete the coursework, but teachers are modifying assignments and tests simply due to the time it takes him to complete. How do I change this practice so he can receive a high school diploma? They are decreasing the number of items on assignments and tests, but not changing the content. I think we kind of already talked about that. If he can show mastery, why are those other students doing so much?
Yeah. As long as he's showing he knows the content, it's again like that. If a student, you have a writing assignment, but a student doesn't do well at writing, but can do it orally, would it be appropriate for him to give an oral presentation? Maybe. I mean, it's going to depend on what the standard is that you're trying to meet. Is it standard of him knowing the information like a history class, so he can tell you the answers, but he can't get them down on writing? That's just a different way of presenting the information or showing me that, well, what he knows.
Laura from VR has a question, and I am so happy to see so many folks from Voc Rehab here today. That's awesome. This is a great group. How does DOE monitor base/regular diplomas versus a school-issued diploma or certificate of completion? It seems there may be inconsistencies in how schools look at these. Maybe that's where your trainings will help too.
I think that just has to come with trainings because I'm not sure that we really do monitor that. The districts have to put that information into our student information management system, whether the student has actually graduated. Districts know that if they have a district diploma, it's not considered that regular high school diploma. So on their transcripts, it should somehow show that, you know, they haven't met all the requirements.
The next comment, I guess, it would be great to have a Q&A session about accommodations and modifications with examples provided to the trainer ahead of time. So that might be something for us at TSLP to look into for one of our roundups. I think that
Okay.
for teachers to send questions. Kelly asks, would you be able to give us a clear response to if electives course can be modified? I would like to be consistent and on the same page as everyone else.
I will find an answer to that.
Yeah. So be watching this space and our updates and whatnot. We'll bring you those answers. Cassandra asks, firstly, she says, thank you for answering all the questions today. I have several middle school students coming up to me next year and your information was helpful. I have a question in regard to where the document assessment waiving information on the IEP, where to document assessment waiving information on the IEP, but that's another day, I suppose. Oh, sorry.
Well, I can talk about that. So waiving an assessment, the state does not accept the waivers for any of the assessments. We expect all students to take assessments. Districts may accept them, but if districts accept them, then that counts against the district's participation rate. What we do accept is we do accept medical exemptions for those most medically fragile students. Okay, so we really don't have a waiver.
Linda asks, can a student earn credits for working?
I think so. Is that part of a capstone? Let me check on that one.
Student internship, yes, for
Yep.
For career tech ed.
Sarah states she's got has taken the math and English praxis and she is highly qualified, so she can
There you
teach
go.
those courses. I'm sorry, Dan, did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, Sarah Fieldhouse has got her hand up. She'd like to ask a question.
So sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay. I was just waiting my turn. It was easier to ask it instead of type it out. So I have a documentation question about kids that will not be receiving the diploma. I guess I kind of ran into an issue this year where it was discussed at the IEP meeting. And it was documented in the PPWN that they would be participating in the graduation ceremony and like the class deposits. But then a further conversation happened after the IEP meeting, and it wasn't exactly stated in the actual IEP that they would be graduating in the ceremony. Is there a special place that I should put that? Should it be like where you have like the graduation requirements listed out? Will it be enough to put it like in the transition activities? My administration just specifically wants to see it written in the IEP, not just on the PPWN.
So you can put it anywhere you want on that IEP. We don't require that there's a specific space to put that. I know there's a couple of sections where it talks about graduation and graduation requirements. You could put it on that same page where you talk about the coursework or the course of study. So I think there's a couple of areas on there where you could put it. So yeah, that would be great to have it on that IEP, just because that makes it so that it is clear to everyone. you know,
Beth,
and
I'll throw in that I usually recommend or suggest to teachers, a good place to put that is under the section where it asks you to fill in the date of when the student is either graduating / or completing their program. You fill in the date, and under that there is space to write comments. And I usually suggest to teachers that, especially if a student is not going to get the regular signed diploma, this is a good place to write what his or her program will be looking like, you know, where the services are taking place and all of that information. Doesn't
Yeah,
have to be there though, like you said.
yep, you could put it there that the student will participate in graduation ceremonies, however, will be returning in the fall to complete transition.
I'm going to skip one question since we're talking about that section of the IEP, and we'll go back. Jennifer states there is a section on the IEP document that states if they will be graduating with a general diploma versus certificate / district diploma, and that isn't consistently filled out. Is that required?
As of right now, I think it is. I know at one time we were trying to maybe not include that, but I think right now it is included that you do need to put in when the student will, I think what the requirement is that you need to put when the student will graduate. We always have just included in or when they will complete their high school education, so that everybody is on the same page. It's just really good to have it. It just really keeps, it's best practice and keeps those parents informed as well.
And of course, there is the requirement at least 1 year prior to graduation, having that laid out what the student needs to graduate.
Yes.
Desiree asks, are these standards the same in state schools versus tribal schools?
I guess I can't speak to tribal schools. I only work with public districts.
And we are caught up with the chat. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask today?
I think a lot of the tribal schools do go by the state's standards. Now, how closely they follow them, you know, I'm not sure. So what is a district diploma? A district diploma is a diploma that a district can decide to give. It's more like a certificate of completion. It just means the student hasn't completed enough of the required coursework.
Cassandra asks, a student who is currently in the 6th grade, has a cognitive disability and is functioning at the kindergarten level. This isn't able to waive an assessment.
So Beth, I'm thinking that might be an alternate assessment question. I think Beth is having some problems with her headset, but
yeah, she lost some power here.
Ran out of batteries.
So yes, so probably with that student, 6th grade cognitive, and if they're in that very low level, 1%, then we might want to look at an alternate assessment. We can't waive and say we're not going to assess them, but we could say that we're not going to give them the regular assessment. We're going to give them the alternative assessment.
Well, we are losing Beth because of some technical difficulties here, but you know, some great questions today.
Okay, and let's see, I guess Cassandra's asking, and let's see if the student wouldn't be able to do the alternative assessment. Like, and again, that might be more of a Beth question. I think that many students are able to do some things with the alternate assessment. More of it is gauged maybe on not checking boxes or whatnot, but more observations and responses to some different things. But you know, a good question for Beth or your regional rep. Okay, here's
We have her
Beth.
back. She's going again.
I'm back.
So we did have a question here that was beyond me. I tried to answer it, Beth, but regarding a student, 6th grades, very significant cognitive disabilities, and we're trying to get a waiver for the testing. And I guess I shared we should try to have the student complete the alternate assessment, and then Cassandra's indicating that she doesn't think the student would be able to complete the alternate assessment. And what advice would you have for Cassandra?
So with the alternate assessment, there's what they call the stopping rule, where you try to assess the student from the first 3 or 4 or 5 questions. And if the student can't answer the questions at all, or even attempt to answer the questions, then you could stop the assessment. Then that student isn't considered a participant, but they're also not considered a non-participant. If you need more information on that, you could surely get a hold of Stacy Holzbauer or Chris Booth, because they are the ones that would take care of that. So how would a district administer an assessment for a student who may be incarcerated? Is this a student that's on an IEP? Or is this a student who is a general ed student? Not that all kids aren't general ed students. That would be a good question for Chris Booth or Matt Gill. I know there are certain ways of doing that, because a lot of the times, if they are 18 or younger, they are receiving their education. And so the person who is doing that may be able to give the assessment, maybe a paper pencil assessment. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I've never had that question before. Good question though.
So Beth, the folks that are asking like that question, could they email you and you could give them those names again and what
Yep.
office they're with? Because
Yep.
I don't know what office they're with either. So thanks. Great questions, you guys. Wow, Beth, thank you so much for all the information you provided. This was great. And I think people are hungry for some being heard and asking questions and getting them answered. So thank you so much.
Oh, I have a question here that somebody asked me privately, so hang on a minute.
I love the attendance today. It's like I say, we need to have these on a snow day more often, except I don't know that any of us want more snow days.
Well, we have a suggestion or two. Well, I guess it's just written twice for a next roundup. So yeah, if any of you have any other ideas or suggestions for topics you are interested in or would be interested in, either throw them in the chat real quick or email any of us liaisons would be fine too. I think we're probably running out of time here very quickly.
It is 4 o'clock on the dot. So thank you everyone for coming. And I'm sure Beth would be willing to answer more questions if you email her. And of course, if you have other questions, you can email us as well, your regional liaison. Yeah, we're open to questions and suggestions. I see we have one here about Q&A about 18 to 21 transition programs. Really good idea.
Mm-hmm. That is a really good idea. Thank you all for joining.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great and safe rest of your week.
Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome. Have a great day.